Okay, I was just checking to see if there was any possibility that Starbucks delivers in Toronto because I don't have time to go walk to one, but I really want a latte. This is dangerous. This is not good. Venti. Boom. Hopefully it shows up during these murder mysteries. Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I am doing a coffee/tea talk. We have our latte on the way, but in the meantime, I'm drinking a peppermint tea and doing a spooky story time with you guys. I actually filmed a vlog for today's video. I filmed it yesterday and I sat down to edit it last night, and honestly, I felt like it just lacked any direction. I felt like it was just kind of me showing you guys me doing yoga again, me getting groceries again, me just trying to get back on top of everything again, and so I felt like it was just repetitive. I thought it would be way funner since last night I actually spent a great deal of time researching a bunch of like serial killers and getting back into just like spooky stories and stuff after I had my mental just like moment of knowing that I just didn't think I could post it. I figured it would be a little bit more YouTuber / Halloween festive to sit down and do a spooky story time with you guys. I've done one of these in YouTuber before. 2 years ago I did my whole ghost story of whether or not I was getting haunted, and it's weird because if you guys have been listening to the podcasts, my coffee talk podcasts, I did a podcast episode that updated you guys that kind of scarier stuff has been happening ever since we moved in here. Today we're talking about a whole other avenue of spookiness that I actually tend to love. Today we're talking true life crime. Again, I'm gonna take a little second to make a side note that this week's Coffee Talk podcast was also about true crime. So if you guys wanna know my top 10 serial killers that scare the actual bejesus out of me, then definitely go check out this week's podcast episode. But today, we're gonna be talking about unsolved murders. These are going to be 3 of the spookiest unsolved murders that I've ever heard of. So brew yourself something warm, or DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever you do where you are, yourself a latte if you're on the same amount of extra today that I am. Plug in some festive cozy lights and let's get spooky. I feel like we need boob in here, you know? We can't have spooky story time without boob. Come on, boob. There we go. Now boob is in the building. Okay, spooky story number 1. So this is probably one of the creepiest stories that I've ever read before. I pulled up the whole article on it so that I make sure that I don't miss any facts. But this is a true life crime that I remember researching way back in like grade 6 with my friend Christine. And we went through like a really big conspiracy theory phase in grade 6 of all things. And I remember researching this back then and being so just like shook by it. Bringing it back up for today's because this one always sticks in my head whenever I think of like unsolved, just like creepy stories. So it was on Wednesday, January 2nd, 1935, when a man named Roland T. Owens checked into a Kansas City hotel called the Hotel President at 1:20 p.m. Only a few days later, his body was found brutally beaten in that same hotel room, only to have then died and passed away a few hours later. The theories around his death are still subject to speculation because of all of the weird occurrences that went down between those few days that Mr. Owens was checked into the Hotel President. I don't know why I'm putting bunny ears on the Hotel President because the Hotel President was real, but Mr. Owens, not so much. They would have aged him anywhere between 20 and 35 years old. So this was a young, striking man. He was nicely dressed. He was said to have a cauliflower ear. I don't know what that totally means. I picture like an actual just stub of cauliflower growing out of the side of his head, but I'm assuming that means that his ear was like tortured. They were like, are they truly picking up garbage right now? The other creepy thing about Mr. Owens is when he checked into the Hotel President, he didn't have anything on him but a comb, toothpaste, and a brush. All noted by the bellboy that helped carry his bags upstairs, aka bag, because if you're only packing a comb, a brush, and a toothpaste, your bag probably isn't that big. So in comes the maid, okay? She's going to be a super important part of this whole mystery. She catches a lot of the details and gives a lot of the backbone to the story here. Owens would allow her to come into his room and clean even while he was inside. So she got like a first row seat at the creepiness and like the weirdness that was going on with Mr. Owens' life. She said that every time she would go into his hotel room, he always seemed super paranoid and like worried all the time, and he had all the lights off except for like one lamp in the background. Automatically, the minute she walked into this room, she was like, something's going down here. On her way out of cleaning on the very first day, he actually asked her not to lock the door because he was expecting company, which not to mention he can easily go out and unlock it himself, but I don't know, whatever. Maybe he was laying in bed and lazy. I've been there. Can we not? Now, it was noted by the maid that she had told police that he'd seemed kind of afraid of something, a little scared, a little paranoid, and liked to keep everything in the room super dark. So at 4 p.m. on that exact same day, the maid, Mrs. Soptic, went back into the room to leave him some fresh towels. When she went in, she found him laying in the dark on the bed, I assume presumably asleep, and she also noticed a note on the side that had said, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." Which is weird because he was passed out on the bed. So it gets creepier. The next day at 10:30 a.m., the same maid, Mrs. Soptic, goes to go clean his room and notices that the room is locked from the outside. When she unlocks it and enters, she finds Mr. Owens inside the room, meaning that someone had left and locked him inside. She kind of just goes about her business, starts cleaning the room even though he's inside, doesn't really ask why he's locked inside or anything, and ends up overhearing him take a phone call. And on the said phone call, he talks to Don again. Remember, Don was the guy who was on the note. So he's on the phone with said Don, and he's like,
"No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I just ate breakfast. I'm not hungry."
And the maid's like, "Who the hell is Dawn?" So around 4 p.m., Miss Soptic comes back to his room, drop off some more fresh towels. Only this time she can hear 2 male voices inside, who again, I can only assume it must be Dawn. I wish the maid had seen Dawn because Dawn is just such a mystery. But anyways, she hears them inside and they're kind of fighting. And she knocks on the door and this gruff voice that apparently just didn't sound like Mr. Owens was like,
"Who is it?"
And she's like, and then that same voice responds automatically saying,
"We don't need it."
Okay, so off Miss Soptic goes, right? She's just like, weird. If I was her, I would have accidentally been like, "Oh, oops," and walked into the room just to spot Dawn. Throughout the night, it was reported by other guests that they had heard not only 2 male voices in that room fighting, but also a female voice ends up coming into play. The following morning, around 7 a.m., the hotel's phone operator noticed that the phone in Mr. Owens' room had been off the hook for quite some time. She sends a bellboy up to check on his room, and there's a do not disturb sign on the door. Despite the do not disturb, he decides to knock a few times and hears a voice say, "Come in and turn on the lights." Creepy. I feel like I would have been like, not so sure about that one. However, because the door was locked and no one was opening it, the bellboy knocked a few more times and then finally gave up and told Mr. Owens to put his phone back on the hook and then left. An hour and a half later at 8:30 a.m., they noticed that his phone was still off the hook. Phone operator sends up another bellboy and this time he enters the room. He noticed that the bedding was darkened around Mr. Owens, but wanted to give him his privacy, so he hooked the phone back up and left the room immediately without turning on the lights or checking in. Thank you. So that was iconic. Oh, I haven't had coffee yet today. This is amazing. Okay, where were we? So the bellboy goes in, plugs back in the phone, doesn't turn on the lights, thinks that he's just drunk and had a crazy wild night and then leaves, which honestly, I feel like if I walked into a hotel room as a bellboy and could tell that someone was in the bed naked and was just told to plug back in the phone, I don't think I'd turn on the lights and bother them either. Understandable, right? But then around 10:30 a.m., the phone operator notices again that his phone is off the hook. So they send up another bellboy. This is the statement that he gave to police. "When I entered the room, this man was within 2 feet of the door, on his knees and elbows, holding his head in his hands. I noticed that there was blood on his head. I then turned the light on. I looked around and saw blood on the walls, on the bed, and in the bathroom. This frightened me and I immediately left the room and went downstairs." So Owens ends up getting discovered with extensive injuries. He had stab wounds on his chest, a punctured lung, bruising from strangulation, struck repeatedly in the head, and a fractured skull. Remarkably, he was somehow alive, and assumably he was the one that was unplugging the phone to try and get someone's attention to come help him or save him. One of the detectives arrived on the scene. He got really close to Mr. Owens and asked, "Who was in your room?" Only Mr. Owens said nobody. He claimed that he had fallen and bashed his head on a bathtub. And then not long after that, he ended up falling unconscious, so they were unable to get any more information from him. That his injuries were sustained probably around 6 to 7 hours before he had actually been found. So he had been laying there in that agony for 6 to 7 hours and somehow stayed alive. They found no weapons in his room. They found none of Owens' belongings, and they also ruled out a suicide. So it truly was just a huge mystery. The only thing that was found were 4 fingerprints on the hotel phone, which were presumably female. But that said, if this was a hotel room, how many people were staying in this hotel? How many females could have been in that room beforehand that had picked up that phone? You never know how much that maid was actually cleaning. I mean, a hotel phone, that could be anybody's fingerprints. So when Mr. Owens ended up checking into the hotel that day, he had said he was from Los Angeles. Investigators ended up researching into Los Angeles, and there was nobody on record under the name Roland T. Owens. He just didn't exist. So shortly after being taken to the hospital, Mr. Owens ends up dying. Word about this whole whole murder mystery ends up spreading, and people around Kansas City are trying to figure out exactly who Mr. Owens is and if there's anybody that might want to know about his death so that they can mourn it. Police also did an extensive search to try and figure out who the heck Don was, but that also turned up fruitless when they couldn't figure out who the heck is Don? Where is Don? Is Don short for Donald? I think the biggest thing that bothers me about this whole mystery is
Who is Dawn?
we were so close to knowing who Don was. So this is where things turn for an even weirder spin. The funeral home ends up saying that they're gonna just do a proper burial of his body and leave it at that. But then, a few days later, they get an anonymous phone call with someone offering money to give him a proper funeral. So the funeral home says yes, and sure enough, on March 23rd, the money shows up at the funeral home. Somebody knows who this guy is, and somebody anonymously paid for his funeral to give him a proper, respected burial. So obviously, whoever this person is really cared about whoever Mr. Owens was. There were also flowers that were sent with an anonymous card that said, "Love forever, Louise." Potential female voice in the hotel room? Potential lover? Dawn's potential lover? Who knows? So about a year and a half later, it's 1936, and Ruby Ogletree, I don't know how to say her last name, she ends up reading an article in the American Weekly. As she's reading this magazine, she ends up discovering that the photo that she's seeing of this anonymous, mysterious Owens, she ends up correctly identifying him as her 17-year-old boy, Artemis. So the weird thing about this is that Mrs. Ogletree ended up getting 3 letters after the supposed death. All 3, though, were typed, which was weird for her because she had never known that he could even use a typewriter. So whoever it was that had killed Mr. Owens, who we now know to be Artemis, ended up typing 3 letters to his mother, pretending to be him so that she wouldn't seem concerned or caught on that he had potentially died. Maybe he was in love with Louise and Don was Louise's actual husband. Maybe, like, there's so many different theories. There was one theory is obviously that Don acted alone, beat the living crap out of him, and left. But then who is Louise? Why would she send flowers? Why would Don have been asking him if he was hungry? Like, that sounds like something caring. Like, you wouldn't call up somebody that you were about to kill and be like, yo, you want some McDonald's? I can pick it up on the way. Like, that doesn't make sense. And why would he have been leaving a note for Don saying that he was back in 15 minutes? If he was afraid of Don, he wouldn't want to be telling Don when he was coming back. So the last and final creepy thing about this whole murder mystery is that the person that ended up sending in the anonymous money said verbatim, "Don't bury Owen in Poper's grave. I want you to bury him in the Memorial Park Cemetery. Then he will be near my sister. I'll send the funds to cover the funeral expenses." And he also called into a newspaper saying that they got their information wrong on how he was going to be buried, and that instead he would be buried in the Memorial Center. When the reporters on the phone asked the anonymous source what ended up happening to Artemis, his response was, "Never you mind. I know what I'm talking about. He got himself into a jam." So there was another theory that maybe he was killed for being unfaithful. Maybe this man's sister was Artemis's real wife. No one really knows. Maybe he was the one that actually killed him. Creepy, right? I haven't watched nearly enough like spooky stuff this Halloween season. I need to watch like a couple scary movies and a couple classics like Hocus Pocus, The Nightmare Before Christmas, which is my all-time fave. But anyway, before then, we must talk about the mysterious death of Elisa Lam. Never heard of this before. I highly, highly recommend you guys go look at the video footage of this. This is the creepiest, most weird unsolved mystery that I think I've ever stumbled upon, solely because the video kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies. You see this girl, she's super disoriented, she like walks into an elevator, she's like kind of confused, she doesn't really know what's going on, then she walks back off, and her body ends up being found in the water tank of the hotel she was staying in. She was a 21-year-old Canadian from Vancouver, British Columbia, and was visiting Los Angeles at the time. She had checked into the hotel on January 26th, 2013, and was last seen on the 31st of January. Her body was found in the 4 by 8 foot water tank on top of the hotel roof, but it was found weeks later, February 19th of 2013. The last known images of her were, like I explained, the video footage of her just acting completely bizarre, like pushing a bunch of buttons on the elevator, just out of it. And then not only that, she seems to hide in the corner of the elevator, like she's afraid of something or scared that someone's gonna see her. Her parents had been getting a phone call from her every single day she had been on this trip up until the 31st when she had disappeared that night. The following few weeks, hotel guests start complaining and saying that there's like a weird taste in the water and a weird smell going on, and that's how they ended up discovering her body. So here's where it starts to get super weird. There was a lock and an alarm to the door that led to the roof of the hotel building. If anyone had opened that door, the alarm would have set off and the whole hotel would have been evacuated. And not only that, it's still not entirely clear how she got herself into the tank. So you would think that with the weird way she was acting in the hotel elevator, maybe somehow, some way, she ended up getting on the roof without triggering the signal. Maybe she had taken drugs that day, maybe she was super drunk and fell in, or who God only knows what, right? But when they did the initial autopsy, there was no cause of death. So they get a toxicology report, and that comes back and rules out drugs or alcohol to not have had even played a role in her death. Not only that, her body showed no signs of any sort of trauma, bruising, abuse, anything. So in the end of it, they could only rule her death as an accidental drowning. The man that ended up finding her, she was lying face up in the water tank and naked. So where were her clothes? So to get into the tank on her own, Elisa would have had to get on the roof without triggering the alarm, get onto the tank's platform, climb a 10-foot ladder on the side of the tank, open up the 20-pound lid, which doesn't sound that heavy, but a 20-pound lid, when you're that like kind of loopy. The other creepy thing is that hotel dogs were brought around to the hotel rooms to sniff out her body shortly after she had disappeared. And when they had brought in these dogs to the roof, they didn't sense anything about her up there. So there's also theories that her body was actually dumped there days after having been killed. Not only that, there were links that found her Tumblr blog, and on it, she was writing about there being creepy people that were bothering her in the hotel. She ended up suggesting on her Tumblr that somebody was following her. And then what's even creepier, her Tumblr account was updated days following her death. So after it was known that she would have been dead, somebody was updating her Tumblr with posts. So I don't know. What do you guys think? I feel like the one thing that I can't really seem to ignore is the fact that she was writing on Tumblr that there were creepy people following her in the hotel room. That says to me that either one, there actually was someone creepy that was following her and stalking her in the hotel room that then later killed her and then started posting to her Tumblr, or she actually was having some sort of psychotic break and thought somebody was creeping on her. Even the way she was hitting the hotel buttons and like tripping out and thinking that someone was opening the door back up, and like she kept peeking back outside. I could also see it being that maybe she had some sort of like, just ended up tweaking a little bit and thought people were following her and was having some sort of just like episode and accidentally maybe climbed into the barrel to hide from whoever she thought was maybe stalking her. But what do you guys think? Leave a comment down below. Murder mystery number 3, Hinton hijack murders. About a week before March 31st in 1922, farmer Andreas Gruber noticed some weird footsteps out in the snow that led to his house, but none that led away. So Gruber notices these footprints, but he never ends up reporting them to police. The following week, on March 31st, a murderer or potential murderers, it could have been more than one, Mr. Gruber, Mrs. Gruber, their daughter, and their granddaughter were all lured out to their barn and killed with a pickaxe. And then not only that, their maid and the maid's son were also killed in their beds. Young Cecilia had not been showing up to school. The mailman noticed that the mail was starting to pile up and things were just starting to seem weird. So long story short, their bodies are found and the police dive into a full investigation. They interview over 100 people, but to this day, no suspects were ever put to trial. They ended up collecting quite a bit of clues that left a lot of us questioning who killed the Gruber family. A few days before the murder took place, just around the same time that Mr. Gruber had noticed the footprints that were coming into his home, but none that had left the farm, note to have been complaining about hearing footsteps up in his attic. He also complained that the keys to his tool shed had gone missing, which would have been where the murder weapon was kept. He had also said that he found a newspaper in his home that he hadn't bought. Imagine how creepy that would be. Imagine you just like wake up one morning and you go down to make your morning coffee and there's just like a newspaper that you didn't buy. Okay, maybe nowadays we don't really read as much newspapers. There's like a book there that you didn't buy, or an app sitting on your phone that you didn't buy. That one's not as creepy. I'm trying to think of like the 2018 equivalent of how creepy that would be. There was a maid that was working for the Gruber family that had quit 6 months prior to the death, saying that she had heard voices in the house and was so sure that it was haunted. Like she couldn't even work for this family or in this house anymore because she was that spooked and quit. The investigators ended up concluding that there was a potential possibility that for 6 months the murderer was actually living in the Gruber home, like in the farm with them, which would explain why people were hearing voices, why people were seeing footsteps. So what's even creepier is they ended up actually taking the heads off of all of the family members' bodies and sent them out for autopsy reports. But because of the craziness of World War II at the time, their heads went missing. Not only was this family brutally murdered, they were all buried headless. So to this day, the murder is still unsolved, and probably will remain that way. I don't know what's creepier, that the killer could have been living with them for 6 months before he killed them, or that their bodies ended up being buried headless. Like, I don't know what part of it gives me more of the heebie-jeebies. And now I just want Larissa to come home because I'm kind of spooked. So there you guys have it. Those are 3 of the spookiest unsolved murder mysteries that I've heard of to date. If you guys are into true crime or you know any spooky murder mysteries that you want to tell me about, leave it down below and we can all just start a whole freaking forum down below. How epic would that be, of unsolved murder mystery stories? Or a thumbs up if yours is already down there and someone's already commented it. And if you guys have any theories to say about the murder mysteries that I told you guys about today, leave them down below. Aside from that, I hope you guys enjoyed today's spooky stories, and I'll see all of you guys in my next video, which will be up very, very soon. I'm filming this knowing that these are late, so I'm just gonna be honest with you guys. They're coming up as hot and as fast as I can get them, and there will be 31 before my laptop takes a nap. So hang in tight, and I'll see you guys in hopefully just a mere few hours. On to the next.